Welcome to the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Louisville attorney Jim Desmond has been handling injury cases related to traffic accidents for over 20 years. Jim will provide valuable information to help you and your family. He wants you to understand the important issues you need to know when it comes to handling car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. There's a lot riding on this, so let's get started. All right, welcome back to the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. We're here with Jim Desmond. He's a local attorney in Louisville, Kentucky. He's licensed in Kentucky and Indiana, and he's with the Desmond Law Office. Today we're going to talk in episode 4 about some more insurance coverages, but we're really going to focus on the topic of uninsured motorist and underinsured motorist coverage. Episode 3, we dealt a little bit more with no-fault coverage and things like that, but today in episode 4, we're going to talk about UIM coverage. Hey, Jim, welcome. I'm glad to see you here, and let's jump into it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Hey, usually when you contact an insurance agent and you decide, okay, this is the policy I want, you sign up for it and you get everything ready to go, and you kind of put it away and you forget about it because it's the one thing we hope we never use, right? When I pull my insurance card out and I flip it over and I start looking at it, I notice there's usually 3 numbers somewhere there on the card, and it's something like 25, 50, 10. Break that down for us. What are we really talking about, and is that enough? What does that really mean, and how does all that apply when we're talking about a car accident?
Well, and I'm going to explain that in 10 seconds, Jim, but you hit a good point, which is, you contact your insurance agent and you say, give me full coverage. I want people to get rid of that concept that full coverage exists. It doesn't. It's not a legal term, okay? Doesn't mean you're necessarily properly covered if you're in an auto accident, okay? So to go to what you just said about this 25, 50/10, let's talk about how you actually read an insurance policy. If you look, they send you this booklet. It's about 100 pages long. There's a thing we call the dec page or declarations page. It's the one with all the numbers. Usually it's 1 or 2 pages, okay? And you'll see the different numbers will be separated usually by slashes, or they'll say single policy limit of so-and-so number. Well, when they're separated by slashes, 25,000/50,000/10,000, that's the state minimum in insurance coverage, meaning you can drive around with as little as $25,000 in insurance coverage and be lawful. Okay?
That's here in Kentucky.
Yes. So when you have that little coverage, what you're saying is that first number is what any one person can recover. So God forbid you go out and you've been drinking and you rear end somebody and you send them to the hospital with a broken arm and 3 surgeries, your insurance company is still only responsible up to that first number for that one person, up to $25,000, okay, per person. That second number is no matter how many people were injured in that accident, okay, that's all they're going to pay out. So you managed to hit God forbid, a van full of nuns, we used to say in law school, okay? Because you knew they were going to, if they offered testimony to the jury, you knew you were in trouble right off the bat, okay?
Exactly.
Your insurance company is still only going to pay up a maximum of $50,000,
and that's what that second number is.
Correct. Okay, and the numbers can change. So okay, if it's 50,000/100,000, the 50,000 is the max one person can recover, 100,000 per accident. If it's 250,000/500,000, again, first number is the maximum one person will recover. The second is the maximum they'll pay out no matter how many people are injured. That last number, okay, for the state minimum, 25,000/50,000/10,000, that's property damage, okay? Now, that's the part I want to warn people about, and that's the part that insurance companies are pretty good about selling a little bit better insurance on. Because, okay, you're driving around with the state minimum, and you don't cause a huge accident, but you hit a 2019 Mercedes in the rear end, okay? If that bill is over $10,000, that repair cost bill, and we're not even talking about pain and suffering, medical bills, just the repairing of that Mercedes is over $10,000, you're in trouble. You're in trouble right off the bat.
So basically, if you've cracked the taillight and you've got this bill, okay, your insurance company's only responsible for $10,000.
They're only responsible for $10,000. So like in that example, that what's going to happen is that Mercedes owner is going to use his own car insurance to repair that coverage, okay, or that car more correctly. Then that company potentially has a claim against your company and maybe against you directly for the excess damage as well.
And that's also that common term you hear, policy limits. Hey, we got policy limits, or someone sued somebody for policy limits. They're talking about the 25 or the 50 or the 10.
Well, yeah, they're talking about the most amount of insurance coverage available under that specific coverage, or, maybe another driver. It can be, we use it a lot of different ways, but yes, it means the most amount of insurance available is basically when you're talking about policy limits. And it varies. It depends. If If you're hit by a 1980 Chevette, chances are they got policy limits of, the state minimum. If you're hit by a UPS truck, it's $1 million plus. It just depends upon, how well somebody is protected. And that's the part you always have to watch for. And that's why on uninsured and underinsured coverage, I said before in the last episode, I'm kind of geeky on some of this stuff. These are my favorite. This is my favorite type of the law. And I'll tell you why, because you have a lot of naysayers out there and say, oh, you're a personal injury attorney, you're after money, you're after this. This advice you can take and use with any attorney in town. You can take and you try to do the claim yourself, whatever it might be. But you got to do it before the accident happens, okay? I've used an example many times on videos and everything else that when a car wreck happens, it's like a photograph was taken. Everything that's in that photograph stays there. You can't pull anything out and you can't put anything in. Well, if you don't have the right kind of insurance coverage before the accident, it doesn't matter that a half hour later you go, and say, oh, here, give me that insurance now that because I was in the accident. It doesn't work. The insurance policies go down to the minute. So again, that's why, little side note again, you drive a car off you go over to, it used to be Sam Swope, it's not anymore, Sam Swope, and you're driving a car off their lot. Call your insurance company before you even take it off. Yes, you have provisions that will cover that car, but don't take the chance. Call them and say, I'm buying a new Honda. This is the VIN number. Put it on my policy.
And get that done before
right.
you even lose.
Right, because again, everything, this has all got to be in place before the accident happens. And the problem we have, one reason I preach about uninsured and underinsured to all my clients, and I wear their poor ears out doing it, is because nobody thinks they're going to use it. Nobody thinks they're going to be in the bad accident, which I get. And 90% of the accidents I deal with are not huge accidents where, the insurance coverage is, not enough. But those 10% that are, you want to cry over them sometimes. And it's not because of what we recover. It's because of the fact that you see people who their lives are changed because of this. And they're stuck with copays or deductibles from health insurance or lost wages that we can't recover, all because there's not enough insurance out there.
And so coming back to these three numbers, that 25, 50, 10, the first two are what we call bodily injury, and
not necessarily.
That 10 is for property damage.
Okay, if you're talking, you'll see those numbers for all different kinds of coverage. Now, if you're talking the state minimum of liability coverage, meaning
right.
the coverage the other guy has to have or you have to have, so that a police officer won't take you down to jail for no insurance, that's liability coverage.
Okay.
And yes, that's the state minimum. But no, you can. This is why I said in the beginning I don't like this term full coverage, because you've listened to me some, and you go to your insurance agent and you say, okay, I know I need bodily injury coverage of $100,000 per what Jim Desmond says. All right. Well, first thing, bodily injury is misleading because it doesn't protect you. It means if the other guy sues you because you're at fault, that's what they will pay up to is $100,000. So then you say, well, gee, that's kind of expensive, so I don't want to spend a lot. So what does the insurance agent do? He gives you uninsured coverage. He gives you underinsured coverage. But he gives you $25,000/50,000, okay? And what's that saying is, again, that if you get hit by somebody else, and so obviously it wasn't your fault, and the other guy has no insurance, all right, what are they going to pay? Your insurance company will pay up to $25,000 because you only have that amount of uninsured coverage. Underinsured, you collected everything you could from the other driver, you still have damages that haven't been paid for, okay? Again, they'll pay the uncompensated damages, but what are they going to pay up to? That $25,000 per person.
So the example we talked about when we talked about the property damage. So I rear in the Mercedes, and I've got my number is 10 at the end there, so I'm going to pay up to $10,000. My coverage is going to cover up to $10,000. They're going to go back and say, well, I've actually got $30,000 in damage because I've got problems with my bumper, I've got problems with my fenders, all these other things. At that point, their own underinsured policy, their UIM coverage. No?
I knew you were going a totally different way. I was like, all right.
Oh, that's right, because this is bodily injury.
Yeah,
only,
we love Jim Ray, but ignore what he just said, guys.
Again, Jim Desmond's the attorney. Jim Ray is not.
Okay, go back here for a second.
Sure.
No, but that's actually a good point. And actually, a little tidbit about Indiana. Well, I don't even want to bring that up at this point because it'll confuse things. Uninsured and underinsured, pain and suffering, uncompensated medical bills. Okay. That's all it's going to cover. It won't cover property damage. That's where you were headed.
Okay. So it doesn't affect. It's not about getting my car repaired. This is about getting medical bills paid.
This is about getting medical bills paid and recovering for your pain and suffering. And what's your pain and suffering claim composed of. Medical bills, lost wages, past medical bills, future medical bills, all these type of things, okay? So this is about getting compensated for all that, okay?
Okay.
And so it's not saying, okay, also, and to be clear, it's not about saying somebody here, this is how you get rich. It's saying you've got uncompensated bills that are not being paid for. When somebody, I'm thinking in one case, let me give you an example, because let's bring this down to a level where it kind of comes across better over audio. I had one client who came to me, and her husband was in an accident. I had actually represented her previously. I gave her the whole thing about preaching about what kind of coverage she needed. Well, they had merged policies in that family, and the other family member didn't have the underinsured coverage. So the short story was that they were hit by a teenager, okay? And that teenager was covered by mom and dad's policy, but again, we had a $50,000 policy limit. We had a hospital stay that was over $100,000 to begin with, okay? So we didn't have any underinsured coverage to go against. And the reason I'm bringing this point up now is that common misperception of people are just trying to get after money and all this other stuff. Not only was there $60,000 of medical bills that really were arguably uncompensated, that we had to get paid through the health insurance, get the health insurance lien waived, and all this other to keep these people out of bankruptcy, okay? But also, this gentleman could not go back to the same job that he had before, okay? It involved a lot of standing. I won't go into the details, but it involved a lot of standing, and he wasn't ever going to be able to do that again, okay? This was a lifelong injury, okay? He was hit as a pedestrian, okay, by this teenager. And the short story is, again, without that underinsured coverage, we had no other source to go against, and it's all luck of the draw. If he had been hit by, I'll be very personal here. I have $500,000 of liability coverage, uninsured coverage, and underinsured coverage on my car. Okay, if he had been hit by somebody like myself, okay, that probably, 110. That was a $300,000 to $500,000 case. Okay, but in the same respect, we couldn't recover that because what did we have? We had $50,000 of insurance coverage, and they didn't have the right kind of coverage on their own policy to begin with.
So in the previous episode, in episode 3, you were talking about no fault or PIP coverage, and you said PIP coverage, UM and UIM are those insurances that really help us in the event the other driver is unable to pay or is at fault. Okay.
And that's the key, and that's the part that people don't understand is everybody thinks. The common misperception is, well, if somebody else is at fault, they're responsible for everything under the sun. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
It doesn't work. And I'm going to be preachy here for a second, but the people that say, oh, you're just after money or this or that, if the law was fair, okay, somebody else just damaged your car. And they also, give you injuries. If you think about it, if the law really was going to be fair, that person would be required to help you get that car to a body shop, help you get a rental car during that time, okay? Help you take your doctor and everything else. But it doesn't do that. It doesn't want to do that because it doesn't want to have to deal with a whole lot of excuses as to why things didn't happen and that type of thing. So what does the law do? This is the part that everybody overlooks. The law gives you one remedy, money. That's it. So when people go in front of a jury and say, well, this guy's asking for money or whatever, he has no other choice. That's what the law is doing. It's saying you can only recover money. Well, if you really want to understand, and this is where I can feel Jim's looking at me because I'm probably ranting a little bit. This is 25 years of practice, though, and a little bit of frustration. If you really want to understand it, you've got to take the step to make sure that the money is there to protect you if you ever need it. If you don't want to make a claim against it and you're worried your rates are going to go up, that's up to you. But make sure it's there ahead of time so that if it's ever required, you're not sitting here saying, oh, what the heck am I going to do? Everything I planned for, from my retirement to my savings and everything else is in jeopardy because some other, excuse my French, jackass hit me in the rear end.
Right. And for a lot of us, it's easy to figure, I don't want to sue the other person. I don't want to. Well, that's nice when you're not in an accident, but once you're staring at a stack of unpaid medical bills that are now all your responsibility for an accident you didn't even cause.
Absolutely. That's the problem.
You might have a different attitude on it.
That's
sometimes.
The problem. And that's the thing. Look at it, even outside, and it's funny you bring that up with the medical bills. Health insurance alone is costing us all a fortune, and so it's like, it's one of those that, you need some other means of doing something with this, and it doesn't matter which attorney you have, okay? I shouldn't say that entirely. This advice can go across attorneys and across states and everything else. We said in the last episode, we talked about if you traveled outside the state, It follows you. You bought this insurance coverage. It follows you down to Florida when you go down to Disney World. So again, somebody hits you down there. Florida's got adverse law and everything else. Again, you probably will be okay. So, but you're waving me to go on to the next section.
Let's just talk about some practical examples here. You've done this for 25 years or so now, and I mean you've seen some pretty important cases where that UIM coverage really came into being, or really came into as a benefit.
Well, and I just mentioned one of them, but I'll give you another one. There's another one that I always find tragic. I represented a girl that she was only 19. To be candid, she was an adult dancer, if you get my drift. Worked at one of the strip clubs, okay? But she was in the back of a motorcycle, so like we talked about last episode, she couldn't recover her no-fault coverage, okay? Couldn't even get that $10,000 in medical bills. But the short story it was the motorcycle driver was at fault. And she did not live with, well, I shouldn't say that. She didn't live with him at the time. Okay, I'll just say that, and then I'll come back to that later. But the short story was he didn't have insurance. He came from a wealthy family. He already had a bunch of accidents. They separated him, and had no assets I could go against or anything else. Okay, they knew what they were doing ahead of time. Well, we recovered ultimately $50,000 for a girl that lost her leg and that was after two other attorneys, by the way, turned her down. So people don't think, oh yeah, well, so and so could have done better. I wish I would have been happy to turn that case over to somebody if they could have found another way to get more money. But that was after we found a policy through her father that covered her basically as what you call a resident relative of the same household. That's a little side note that I do want to kind of mention here for a second on this coverage. You can have coverage under an auto insurance policy as a named insured, okay, or a resident relative of the same household, okay? I'm a named insured under my own car policy, okay? When you pull up my policy, it says I'm a driver. This is what I'm covered under. My daughter, for example, okay, can be covered as a resident relative. So let's say she lives away, okay, but from my, I went a little bit, she's over 18, so I need to go somebody. Let's say I have a daughter who's under 18, okay, and she lives with her mom part of the time, and she lives with me part of the time, okay? Well, even if they're not in my car, okay, and they're in a car accident, it's a bad car accident, potentially my car insurance can still apply to cover my daughter, okay?
Under the UIM policy standard.
Right,
okay.
Right. And I actually was using a divorced example there. So,
right, sure.
So in that case, would my ex have a right to recover any money from my auto insurance? No, she's not a resident relative. She's no longer related to me because we're divorced, okay? But in contrast, my daughter or my children who would be in her vehicle, there would be a priority issue where we could go through multiple layers of insurance coverage, but ultimately my car insurance would cover her medical bills as well as a claim for pain and suffering if we got down to that level. So let me go back to a much simpler example because I had one this week that I do want to kind of share with you folks, because the short story was 20 people on a church van. This case took 8 months to resolve. 20 people in a church van hit by an uninsured car, okay? Turned the van over, so it was not, small, okay? Well, the short story was it took 8 months because everybody had to agree how to divide this one insurance policy that applied, okay?
Wow.
Yeah, so, and the reason is this. There's a little concept in the insurance law, which is, look, if you've got multiple people making a claim against just one policy, you either have to settle all of them at the same time or none of them. And you think about it, it makes sense. You got a $50,000 policy. They don't want to pay my client $49,000 and tell everybody else, well, now you got to split $1,000. That just wouldn't be fair under the law. Okay?
Right, but okay, let me ask you this though. You've got 20 people in the van. Mm-hmm. Mr. and Mrs. Smith up front are with Allstate. Mr. and Mrs. Jones in the second seat are with State Farm. I mean, you got all these different policies in there,
right?
And they may all go out and get their own attorneys to sue that at-fault driver, the car who hit the church van. How does this come? I mean, can the attorneys talk, and can you guys kind of figure out how to divvy up that whatever that ultimate number is?
Yes, but you went a different way with it. Okay. So, like in my example, the at-fault driver was uninsured. Okay, had no insurance. Okay. So the policy that had to be divvied up was on the church van. Okay, and yes, that's where we all had to get together. Well, normally, if there was a smaller group, when I've had 3 or 4 attorneys, involved, what happens there is you all get together. You've got to either come to an agreement, okay, on how to divvy that up, okay, if the insurance company is offering the full policy limits, okay, the maximum they have again.
Right.
Because if you can't agree, then what happens is it's called an interpleader case. If anybody wants to Google it, it's inter and then pleader. And basically what you're doing is, what the insurance company is doing more correctly is they deposit that money with the court. They say, you divide it up. Well, how does the court determine that? You're kind of doing a mini little trial in front of a bench judge, okay? So you're kind of, it's a bench trial. It's a pain in the tail end, okay? So yes, if you can agree, you want to be able to do that. Well, so let's stick with the smaller example first, and we'll come back to the church van. So let's say there's 3 or 4 people injured, and there's only 50,000 policy limits on an at-fault driver. That's where you were kind of headed, Jim.
Yeah.
If my guy has insurance through Allstate, okay, I can collect the maximum I can against that other driver, and then I can preserve the right to go against my company, or his company more correctly, Allstate, okay, and say, again, we want underinsured benefits. We didn't get enough money over here for my client. His claim for pain and suffering was not fully compensated. So we have a right now to go against you Allstate, to recover more money. That's an underinsured claim.
Okay, so Mr. and Mrs. Smith would, again, go after the at-fault driver up to their portion of whatever that amount's going to be, and then they can go back based on their own UM or UIM coverage and say, hey, there's still additional, that we're entitled to through our own coverage.
Right, UIM, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. That's an underinsured claim. UIM is always underinsured,
Yeah.
okay? And if you get that right, matter of fact, insurance adjusters get that wrong all the time. No offense to them. There's a lot I love. There are a lot of good people out there doing it. But it's you got to separate which one you're dealing with. Now, in my example with the church, okay, that this case that took 8 months, the other guy was uninsured, so that was an uninsured motorist coverage policy. And in that case, we went to, I'll say it was an arbitration where somebody had to, this one appointed arbitrator assigned a value to each claim. Okay, and once we had that, we could then go against our client's own underinsured coverage to try to recover more. Now, again, in my case, my client doesn't want to involve her own auto insurance. That's fine. Okay, my job as an attorney is not to force her to do that. My job is to advise her as to what her rights are. Okay, and she has those rights because she bought the right kind of coverage to begin with. But if she doesn't want to use her own auto insurance, that's up to her. I've made a point to her that I think we could do okay with it. I think we could recover a certain amount over and above what we're recovering. But she says, I can live without that amount. So that's her call.
Yeah. So the person maybe in the front of the bus who has 2 broken legs as a result of the impact might feel they have a claim to a higher amount of that settlement value versus the person in the backseat who may have a sprained wrist.
Right.
From just
whenever you have those kind of cases, it's not an equal split.
Right.
9 out of 10 times.
And that's where the parties have to get together and
and that's where again the attorneys have to get together because you're kind of bringing in what's the value of a claim is what we all have to determine, and the value of a claim depends upon total medical bills, pain and suffering, length of treatment, all these other things, but yes, it's kind of determined as to what the value of the claim is and how do we do like a pro rata distribution of that. So
okay, you have some other examples that deal with UIM coverage.
The one I always like to bring up, and if you've ever been around me or heard my other stuff, you hear this probably too often, but there's 2 cases, that back-to-back motorcycle cases. And the first one I always think is interesting because, again, and I won't go into all the details because of attorney-client privilege, but he had a situation, very well-employed person during one of our wars, okay, and very high up. And he was hit on a motorcycle that didn't have underinsured coverage on it. We looked at the automobile policy. That didn't have it either, okay? So the at-fault driver was driving a Ford pickup truck, okay? And luckily a little bit older, had a little bit better coverage. But ultimately we recovered $250,000. And unfortunately, this gentleman that I represented, he was killed, if I didn't make that clear. He was killed on this motorcycle. And he was actually younger than I am, so.
Tragic.
But so again, his claim was worth a whole lot more, but all we could recover for his widow was $250,000. Okay, and we were lucky to have that because if you think about it, what's the average policy limit out there right now in Kentucky? Probably $50,000 to $100,000. Okay,
right.
Now contrast that with another case where right after that, I had this case within 6 months after a guy was hit on a motorcycle. I co-counseled it with somebody that he and I did. I loved working with him and stuff like that, which I will do sometimes. I'll pull in somebody who is just phenomenal, and he had a very good reputation in a lot of ways because, again, what happens is you benefit the client and potentially you recover more money. So if you're splitting attorney fees, who cares? But that's a little tangent on the side about co-counsel. That's a future episode. We'll have to talk about that.
I'll put that down in the notes.
All right. But the short story was we recovered over $600,000 on that one. Okay, because the person who hit him, and we didn't have underinsured wasn't involved. His own automobile policy wasn't involved. Nothing. Why did we recover so much in the difference, even though that guy lived, okay, and went on with his life? Because, again, he was hit by a semi-tractor trailer. There was no issue on insurance coverage. They're required to have a lot of insurance, and over above that, you have a trucking company that has a lot of assets. If we did have to exhaust that insurance, it's a totally different ballgame. So, again, the value of a claim, this is what people don't understand, and this is where I want to strangle the TV advertisers, on the attorneys who advertise on TV, because they're always like, we'll get you a check or one call and that's all, and all this other stuff. The value of a claim, if you want the honest answer, okay, it really depends more upon what the insurance coverage is out there. Because, again, you lose your left arm in an accident, and the guy's driving a 1985 Pontiac Sunbird, and you're in trouble. He probably has very little insurance. In contrast, it's a local courier that is a commercial business that's been around for 20 years in Louisville. They've got enough insurance, okay? I'm not saying we're going to put the business, put it out of business with the claim. I'm not saying we have to do that or anything, but we've got enough insurance to cover your damages. And again, what are we talking about with damages? Everybody wants to say pain and suffering and trying to get rich. We're talking about things that are uncompensated, medical bills, copays, deductibles, lost wages, scarring, future treatment. I rant a little bit on this one. I know, because this is the part as a personal injury attorney. Again, excuse my language, it pisses me off because people come in that are very nice people. They didn't do anything wrong. And I'm sitting here struggling to find insurance coverage. And we've got a state minimum that was established in 1976. And yet it's not the lowest state minimum in the nation. So
you said something in that example that kind of piqued my interest. Let's say it is a courier for a local business, and there's a lot more insurance there. They've been around for 20 years, whatever. You're not actually suing the business per se. You're suing their insurance policy. Is that kind of in line? I mean, it's
yes and no.
Because a lot of people are hesitant to sue somebody.
The first part is, okay, when a car wreck happens, okay, and they come to me, I get a police report, and my first part is to open a personal injury claim, okay? So there's no suit, there's no suing, okay? You're making a personal injury claim against their policy. Well, what does that consist of? That consists of you letting the client get the treatment they need, getting the medical bills paid, getting those medical records and bills together, and making a demand on that insurance company and seeing if you can get it resolved, okay? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. It just depends on the insurance company and how they view it and how much insurance and 20 different factors, okay? Now, if you can't get it resolved, then you file a lawsuit. That's when you're suing someone, okay? And a lawsuit means you're going in front of court, okay? I had a deposition earlier this week, and again, it's just a totally different ballgame when you have a lawsuit, because now my guy was sitting here being questioned. I was amazed, but it's how it happens. We're talking of his medical history for the last 10 years, and he's trying to remember different years he had things done. That's more of a lawsuit. And so I'm sorry, to go back to your original question, if you file a lawsuit, you are suing that individual legally, but again, the insurance company is the one providing the coverage, okay, and they're going to indemnify that individual basically because that's the insurance contract they have. Okay, right, so again, right. They're not going to be the one that pays the money out. Okay,
generally speaking. Yeah.
You're not going to know. The worst part is, though, little side note: a jury's not going to know that. You cannot mention the term insurance in front of a jury at trial. Wow. So they don't know that. So again, they think, well, if I award $100,000, that this other guy is going to have to pay $100,000. That's not the case.
It's an interesting area of law. I mean, it really is an interesting area. Hey, Jim, let's do this. We try to end every segment with something that kind of gives other people an idea about, how you think through the cases, how you work with the clients, and a bunch of different issues that come up. And we call this segment, So This Happened This Week, Why don't you unpack that one for us?
Well, you know what I want to do is I want to give everybody a little bit of a tidbit, okay? And I want to be careful about using it, but because it's a little complicated, but it does work. We talked last week about no-fault insurance, all right? So the no-fault carrier has a lien against the case, as it says, which means that they got to be paid back. Well, that's why if you ever handle a case on your own, you settle it exclusive of the no-fault lien, okay? Well, what people don't know is, back to our policy limits discussion, is if the policy limits for an at-fault driver are ever offered or tendered to you, the right of the no-fault carriers goes away. They have no right to recover their money back. So the no-fault carrier paid you $9,000, and the other insurance company offered you the policy limits of $25,000. Boom, the $9,000 goes away it's extinguished. It vanishes into midair. Okay, so it's a little bit of a trick, and the insurance companies know this, and they fight me a lot on it. But sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. If you think about something, if you have an insurance company, again, you have to know the policy limits on the other side, which they don't always reveal. But if I have a $25,000 policy limit on an at-fault driver, and I've got an insurance company offering, say, $14,000 to my client, but the no-fault carriers paid $10,000, they're looking at paying out $24,000 on a $25,000 policy, right?
Right.
So what should they do? The argument I make to them is they should tender all that $25,000 to my client. Okay, yeah, I rounded up by 1,000, I know. They should tender that full $25,000 to my client to protect their insured from me suing that person beyond that policy limit of $25,000. Okay, if I can get them to do that, the right of the no-fault carrier goes away, so I don't have to pay back that no-fault carrier. You follow me?
I think so. So ultimately, what happens to the bills for your client?
They got paid by his insurance company, and then his insurance company have to swallow the fact that they paid the bills. They can't recover it from anybody, even though my client wasn't at fault.
Okay.
So it puts more money in my client's pocket.
Ultimately, that's what you're trying to do with every case.
Right.
It's a matter of how you manage not only what the full settlement amount is, but how those dollars then get dispersed and in what order.
Right.
Is that a fair statement?
That's a pretty fair statement. One other quick point. I got to get this in there. Sorry. If they ever offer policy limits to you, a liability carrier, an at-fault driver offers policy limits, pick up the phone and call me, okay? And the reason I'll tell you this is because to make an underinsured claim, there's requirements under the law that you have to follow. There's a statute that says we have to do some specific requirements, okay? If you don't do that, the right of the underinsured the carrier goes away. You don't have a right to recover it, okay? You don't follow these procedures, you lose your underinsured claim, okay? Is your insurance company going to tell you got an underinsured claim? No. Why are they trying to do? They're trying to save money.
Right.
Is the at-fault company going to tell you that you've got an underinsured claim? No. What are they trying to do? Protect their driver. Well, they can't do that if they're exposing them to a possible other claim, okay? So again, if you hear that somebody's offering policy limits and you think you did a great job because you don't have an attorney, take a step back, pick up the phone. We can have a 10-minute free phone call. It won't bother me at all.
Perfect. Hey, Jim, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been a really good segment about really other types of coverage that are kind of complicated. They're not something that we think about every day, but in the case of UM or UIM coverage, can be extremely, extremely helpful, to you and your family. And I want to thank the listeners for spending time with us. And if you have questions, give Jim a call on his cell phone. Go visit the website, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. But attorneydesmond.com is a great site. It's got a lot of information out there. And, Jim...
Or better yet, send me an email.
Yeah.
Email's the letter J, Desmond, Desmond, atty@yahoo.com. Send me an email. Send me a copy of your deck page or your policy. I don't care. I'll mark it up.
Yeah.
I'll send it back to you. I'm not going to charge you anything for that. Come on.
Good deal.
So.
Hey, once again, thanks everyone for your time. And hey, if you enjoyed what you heard today, tell a friend. Get them to listen to the podcast. Get them to subscribe to it. And we'd really appreciate your help and support. So until next time, this is Jim Ray and Jim Desmond saying goodbye from Louisville.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye. That's it for this episode of the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Jim Desmond will be back in 2 weeks to provide information you need to know related to car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. Until then, check out attorneydesmond.com. You can also follow him on Facebook at Attorney James Desmond. Drive safely and please remember to buckle up.